All right, we're going to dive straight in and we're going to just go straight in with a game. So let's just get everybody playing something. Lovely to see so many people here. If you have cameras and you want to turn them on, that would be great. Some of you may have seen this game before. If you have, let's see if we can figure out some funky, interesting ways of doing things. All right, so let me just make sure I have the chat window open just so I can see it. And yeah, for those of you just arriving, if you want to type in the chat kind of whereabouts in the country you're from and what your role is in math education, that'll be awesome. All right, but we are going to start with a game. And we're going to start with a game with this little penguin. I'm sure a lot of you are somewhat familiar with the penguin whose name is Gigi. And in this game, which you may or may not have seen, if you have, hopefully we can do something a little different with it. The name of this game is pretty simple. We got to figure out how to get Gigi across the screen. So here's a puzzle. And you can see here's Gigi. Feet are up, pointing out of the screen, kind of pointing at us. And we have to make a series of moves to figure out how to get Gigi across the screen. And the things we can do are these things across the bottom of the screen. Let's call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we can get to choose 3 of them. We can choose them in any order. We can repeat them. We can do whatever we need to do. And let's just see, if you want to turn on cameras and start holding up fingers, that would be fantastic. That's a really nice way of giving me some interesting feedback on what we should do. If not, you could type a number between 1 and 6 in the chat. So let's just see. Why don't we try this? Let's see. Jim, I'm going to make you hold that thought because you played this game last week. So you just got to hold that thought for a second. Let's see. Somebody give me a first move. What do we want to do here? What do we want to do for a first move? Got. And now there are actually 12 ways of solving this puzzle. So there's basically, and I'll tell you, any one of these 6 moves would be perfectly fine for a first move. So does anybody want to give me what's a first move we could make? I know I'm hitting you with a game straight out of the blocks here. It's 10 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast, a little bit later. Number 1. All right, let's go with move number 1. I like it. Now, I did say that any move is a possible first move here. This is totally true, number 1. The nice thing is, I've probably used this game in presentations probably several hundred times. I do not think any time ever has anybody chosen number 1 as the first move. So this is great because this is awesome. This means everybody's now going to have to think about it in a totally different way from how you normally would. All right, so just think about what's happened to Gigi. Just imagine that. Notice Gigi did not move, right? It's not because it's wrong. Totally good move. But we got to figure out now, we got to figure out all 3 moves. And we got to visualize it in our heads. What do we think? So we've got 1. What's the next move? Yeah, that's what happened. What do we want to do next? Jim, you're allowed to answer now too. So 6. All right, we're going for a 6. Okay. I'm liking it. Let's see. 1 more move. This puzzle, by the way, is puzzles that we can get kinder and first grade students to solve. So I don't want anybody to feel any pressure this morning, this afternoon, depending upon what time it is where you are. So 1, 6. We got 1 more move to make. You can either type in the chat or you can hold up fingers. It's all good. What do we think? What's the last move? Let's just give everybody a chance. Give everybody a chance. I want to see if we can get. It's a lot of people with names on the screen and no cameras. Someone could type something in the chat. Let's see. What do we want to do here? Are we smarter collectively than kindergarten students? What do we think? All right, Jim, I can tell you're dying to give me the move. Let's go for it. All right, let's go for 6. Let's see. Have we got these kindergartners beat? Let's just try this out. 1. Oh, what an interesting way. And Gigi gets across the screen. All right, fantastic. All right, lovely. So I'm going to go. Actually, let's just have a little look here. Well, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. Um, so we played a game. We saw a tiny little bit of ST math. What we're actually going to do today is talk a little bit about what this gameplay looks like in context, how we can utilize this to actually build a culture of learning at schools, and actually use a game with a penguin to kind of be the vehicle to do that, and how that can radically transform students' interaction with math in general. And obviously, right now, we're dealing with a very tricky, difficult thing with this whole notion of learning loss. It has been a very tough year, a very difficult year. And with me today, I've got somebody else from Mind. I have Brian Coffey, who's our Senior Academic Director. And Brian, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the history of what you did before you came to Mind, because you certainly did a lot in education. And then maybe we'll start talking a little bit about learning loss and then dive into other stuff. And then we will get back to and look at and see how game-based learning through visual games can actually radically change the way that students can interact with math. So, Brian.
Hello, thanks, Nigel. Appreciate that. Good afternoon from where I'm at in Ohio. Yeah, I saw Gigi, which is the penguin, the famous penguin from ST Math, first time about 10 years ago. I was an instructional coach here in Columbus, Ohio, working with K-12 buildings all over Columbus City schools, and we were looking to implement ST Math at that time. And then I became an assistant principal and a principal, and I got to take ST Math, Gigi with me in each of those buildings. Gladly talk about what that did for us in terms of math culture in those schools. But most importantly, more recently, I want to share this. My wife uses ST Math as a first grade teacher in her class, and my children, I have 4 kiddos. They've all in grades, they're in 3rd grade through 8th grade. All have been using ST Math for the last decade or about, and so they're awesome. They're doing great too. And now I get to last couple of years be with ST Math formally as an academic director, and I love the role I get to talk about ST Math in schools and take a different angle and approach on how it can be effective in the school building. I would say this the biggest thing I like about ST Math, and I really believe in my core, it is absolutely a school-wide instructional tool to help kids become more comfortable and confident with math. And I'd love to chat more about that, Nigel.
All right, cool, fantastic. Thanks, Brian. And just for a little background as well, I certainly was never a principal. Brian, you have taken leadership roles that I have not been in. I was a high school math teacher, and then I was math director for Los Angeles Unified for several years. And I also saw Gigi for the first time in a classroom in my role as math director with LAUSD. I walked into a classroom about 11 years ago, actually, and saw kids solving problems and just saw a level of critical thinking that kind of blew my mind. And that for me was I sort of went, wow, I need to go and build games with a penguin, which is what I've been doing for the last 11 years. So I think the key, it's obviously been a very tough year. It's been a heck of a year. My kids are now back in school. I only have 2 of them. But I have another who's 26, but she hasn't used Gigi for quite a long time. But my 2 younger children who are 1st grade and 4th grade are now back in school finally. But obviously, it's been a really challenging year. And for my son who's in 4th grade, he actually did really well being out and learning remotely. Totally fantastic. And my daughter who is in 1st grade, 1st graders doing Zoom school is not a pretty sight, and it was tough and it was a very difficult year. And challenging in many, many ways. And obviously, we hear a lot about this notion of learning loss, and it's a big challenge for this year. And Brian, I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit about it. Maybe I have issues with the term learning loss, but then I have issues with all kinds of things anyway. So I'm just wondering what your take on that, maybe as a term, but then also just sort of maybe things that you've seen in the past with intervention. I'm just curious, kind of how you've seen that play out at schools.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is if you had learned it, how did you lose it? So I
Right.
think that definitely that term, I guess, already presumes some things that may not be necessarily so or true. And I think fundamentally, as we think about what next school year looks like, regardless of your school district's past year, some people were in hybrid mode, some were all at home. And there were some districts that went in person, my kids included. However, that year was funky, was not the same. A teacher was far away from their students and with masks on, couldn't sometimes even understand some of the instruction, and also they couldn't socialize like they normally would be. So
Mm.
there's, regardless of the environment, learning environment everyone was in, it was definitely upside down world in a lot of ways, and we made the best of it for sure. But for me, I think this whole idea of learning loss, we need to, what we gotta, I think, focus in on is capturing a reset, a restart for students in a really healthy way, in a light that's a bit different from, I think, the term even loss. I think in terms of a positive relationship to schooling, a positive relationship to how to be a student again in a school day that's more normal than what we've had this past year. And so to me, and I kind of mentioned it, I want to have a reset where a student feels comfortable in the school setting, that they want to engage in that with a teacher, with their friends, but also in the learning, that they have a comfortability
Right.
there, and ultimately they get to a confidence level of the learning that they're going to have, regardless of the difficulty. That they meet a challenge that they want to conquer, and want to do and solve, and so that way there's both the yin and yang of comfortability, but also a confidence in what they're doing at school.
Right. So I guess one of the critical challenges then is, when we look at sort of traditional ways of dealing, I mean, there's no doubt that data shows, now your point is very good, like if they learned it really well in the first place, how come it's lost? But there's no doubt that data shows that, kids are going to be coming back to school. And, you know, for some students, it's going to be very different. But overall, there's definitely perhaps a sort of, they're bringing less with them, as it were, in terms of what they've learned from previous years. So there's definitely a significant challenge. And I think one of the things that kind of certainly concerns me greatly is that the traditional approaches we've had to solving these problems, which I have to say seem to be very popular right now, I don't think they're that strong. I think there are a lot of problems with them. And, it sort of goes like, if we take something like, for example, let's just say seventh grade, right? Integers. I mean, the kids may see this at different points before, but this whole sort of, this is a classic piece of sort of middle school math, or maybe a little earlier, depending upon the way the standards are written. Um, but if we take something like this, the traditional way of sort of approaching this is to say, and I'm sure, Brian, you have seen many posters of this type of stuff up in schools. I
For
have
sure.
seen a large number of posters of all these rules in all sorts of classrooms, and it's like, memorize these things. And the traditional approach here is basically to say, right, what we're going to do is we're going to teach all this stuff, and we're going to go through, and we're going to give you tons of practice to make sure that you kind of like learn all these things. My son, literally right now, I know he's in fourth grade, but he's been given some extra sort of stuff. And the sad part is that the extra stuff they were given was basically worksheets on this. And anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked in that. But it first of all, this is problematic in and as of itself. This is just not a great way to teach math. But the problem then is when kids are coming back to school, what we're likely to do, and what most people are going to think of, is here's how we deal with learning loss, right? We do some assessment and we figure out the stuff that the kids don't know. We figure out the gaps. We figure out from this list of stuff that they're supposed to be able to do, we figure out the stuff that's missing. Then we give them some material to say, oh, here's how you do this. And then magically, that's going to mean these gaps are filled. And that means they know this math, right? Like, we're done. Great. Fantastic. We finished the math. And unfortunately, first up, this is a terrible way to teach this in the first place, let alone. But then even this remediation, and Brian, to your point, if this stuff was learned really well in the first place, or if it was learned in a way where the learning was meaningful, why
Mm,
would so much of it suddenly just be lost? And the reason that it's
mhm,
lost is because it's actually not learned very well in the first place. This is not a good way to approach this. And just because a student can do every single thing on this list does not mean that they actually understand
mhm,
anything about this mathematics. And that, sadly, is the way that we kind of approach almost all math. And I'm sure you've seen this in schools in many ways. This tends to produce a lot of math anxiety. This approach, I mean, the fact is that getting kids to kind of memorize and then practice a bunch of rules that, to be honest, are pretty arcane, produces a lot of math anxiety. And one of the reasons for that math anxiety is this is not how mathematicians think about this math, right? No one who is a math person actually does it like this or thinks about it like this. So we're trying to get kids to do something. And then of course they, internalize things like, oh, I'm just not a math person. No, you're totally a math person. This is not a good way of teaching math. Full stop, end of story. And yet we keep doing it, or we do some version of it, or we keep buying and spending a lot of money on programs that literally basically do this. They go through, they figure out where the gaps are, and then they give you a bunch of stuff to try and get you to learn this sort of thing. And I don't know, Brian, whether you've got any thought about math anxiety, any things that you've seen in your sort of time, especially as a principal or whatever. And we'll talk a little bit later on about the counteracting that. But I don't know if you've got anything, just the actual anxiety piece of it itself. Any thoughts or things
Yeah.
you want to talk about there?
Well, I certainly, whenever the red dots popped up, that gave me some anxiety.
Yeah,
Because how do you
right. Yep,
learn some of those without the connections? It's
yeah,
and
absolutely.
the gaps you fill there. It's kind of comical how we do try to fill gaps with a broad sweep of curriculum. But I think that the learning loss and then the math anxiety that is going to be prevalent this coming school year. I mean, it's real. It's math anxiety has always been real, but I think the reality is we haven't had a good, healthy beginning with math and a
Right,
relationship
right.
that's rooted in a confidence that you can do it, and I know that we're going to chat more about how that confidence can be built up. But I think most students that I've come across, especially as a principal, they equated whether they were a good student, good at school, if they were good in math class, if they
Hmm.
liked math, and that's a
Right.
reality. And if they're good in math, man, they feel like they're great at school. And if they're not so
Right,
great in
that
math
confidence
class,
can
yeah,
work through a lot of different things.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges is that we spend a lot of time worrying about this question, right? We
mm,
worry about and we try and change. We do a lot of professional development, trying to get people to shift the way they do it. Let's teach less procedurally, more conceptually. And I did a ton of PD as math director of LAUSD. I basically did a ton of professional development with high school teachers, middle school, and then even with elementary as well. And a lot of that focus was trying to get people to teach differently and really answering this question. And the challenge and the thing that I realized when I walked into that classroom 11 years ago, the thing that I realized was that I was asking the wrong question.
mm,
Someone else had asked a very different question, and they'd asked, how do we learn? They'd asked, how does this learning happen? Can we figure something out? And in fact, that was the genesis of ST Math. It grew out of neuroscience research into basically this question: what if math could be taught the way the brain learns? And the outcome from that then was this program ST Math, the ST being spatial temporal, um, and spatial temporal being highly, highly visual. And it means that when you first see it, it looks really, really different. And this is just one, it's a game-based learning system, and this is a game. There are all sorts of different ones, and we'll look at some in a minute. We played one a little while ago, but it looks different. You interact with it very differently. It is literally a problem-solving game-based thing, and you're basically trying to figure out, how do I get this little penguin, Gigi, across the screen? But because it looks so different, and because it's designed from this game-based sort of spatial visual reasoning perspective, the level of engagement that certainly, and this is what I saw when I walked into a classroom for the first time, I saw kids engaged in problem solving, critical thinking, and doing mathematics. And Brian, to your kind of point, actually enjoying the experience of math class
mhm.
in a whole different way. And that, when I saw that and saw the sort of thinking that was going on, I was like, oh my God, there's something really profoundly different and exciting here. And I think the one of the fascinating things that we've seen since then is that these differences actually produce substantial effects. And the What Works Clearinghouse, for example, defines substantial effects as an effect size between 0.25 and zero point 0.5. And ST Math has had repeated studies at multiple grade levels, and this one was a huge one: 42,000 students in a control group, 42,000 students in a treatment. This is not like, oh, this was one class or just one class of second grade. This is thousands of kids across the country, all of whom come out with this very substantial effect size. And what's fascinating here then is it looks so different. How can something that looks so weirdly different, like a game with these things, with its wholly visual thing, be so different from all the stuff that we're used to doing? But it has an effect size that is significantly higher than all the other sort of things. where you're going to get other programs that basically either at best have something of a negligible impact, or you're going to have programs that actually are detrimental. So on that math anxiety piece, I watched my daughter playing a sort of, online sort of game thing. It wasn't really a game, learning system, where basically if you start getting things wrong, you see the percentage coming down. And she got freaked out. I mean, she got worried and got math, and she loves math. She enjoys it. She loves doing it. And she was getting anxious and worried because she saw her percentage coming down when she's making mistakes. That is detrimental and having serious negative impact.
Mhm.
And yet that's precisely one of the ways that people think they're going to, oh, this is how we're going to recover learning loss. And it's just, it just worries me because it's not, that can have very long-term profound effects. So I think, the big question is that how can, with games, how can we take something like this huge set of integer rules? How on earth can we do something that isn't basically go through this and learn how to do all these different things? And I want to sort of dive into the math here a little bit because I can't help it. I love math. It's fun. It's exciting, and we're going to dive deep into it for a second and really kind of get stuck in here. Um, and I think the fascinating thing is, what if we could take this and instead of all of these rules, and Brian, you mentioned earlier this idea that, you're just memorizing these disconnected facts, right? And that's kind of the
Mhm.
way that this again produces that anxiety. What if we could, instead of memorizing all these things, what if we could replace this with a set of just a few really big ideas? And one of the key things here is this is how our brain actually learns stuff. One of the reasons we get so much math anxiety when we're trying to memorize disconnected rules is that it doesn't match the way that we actually learn. Our brain learns a lot more like this, where we have big ideas, and it's not just the ideas, it's the connections between them that really help us understand how things work. So our brain builds literally neural networks, we call them schemas, and these schemas are what, when we say someone has a conceptual understanding, we literally mean they have these big connected schemas of ideas. And these are built around really, really big things. So, for example, we can just take a few really big ideas and replace all of those integer rules. One of the big ideas is that when we're adding things, basically what we're doing is we're joining things together. So, for the concept of addition, we're just joining stuff together. That's a big idea. Another big idea, which we see a lot of and a lot of people use, is that multiplication, one way of thinking about multiplication is that, you know what, we can take two numbers and we can make an area out of them. And that area can be measured. And that's one way of thinking about multiplication. Um, and then the other really big idea, and if we can combine all three of these, the other big idea is that when we think about negative numbers, what we're really talking about is it's something we can flip, right? So a negative is basically a flip. Now we can take these three big ideas, joining together, creating area, and flipping around this origin. And we can replace all of those integer rules by just learning how these three things interact. So let's just have a look at how that works in a game situation. And this is a game. Gigi will appear here. We need to figure out how to get Gigi to this platform. And you can see here, I've got this plus sign. If as a student, I have no idea what I'm doing, I can just drag this somewhere and I can check it out and see what happens. And oh, okay, it's joining together. That got a little bit too far. So I see, all right, I need to join something together here, maybe about this much. And when I do that, all right, got Gigi to the basket. So we can see how, okay, and now I think again, I probably need something like about this. So, okay, I understand. I'm joining things together and ooh, now I need to go the other way because I have this much, but I need to get back here. But I do notice I can either do this, but I can also do this. So you know what? Even when we've got negative numbers, we can join those together. I can take the greens and I can join these reds, but this time it'll join it the other way. I get all these sort of cancellations of these negative pairs, zero pairs, and I can do that. Okay. So now, like I said, maybe I didn't notice that. Maybe I think, oh, I need to move to the left. So let's see what happens when I do this. And ooh, that was interesting. It flipped. So, okay, so like I said, the negative is basically doing something in the opposite way. So it's flipping it around, but I can still join stuff together. All right. And we can even, of course, go, oh, if I'm subtracting a negative number, it's going to flip that negative number, which means I can join together and get back to the positive. So just a few simple things, and I can take multiplication here. I can go, okay, yep, I can create an area that's going to get me here. I can multiply by a negative number, and that's going to flip this across. And like we saw already, I can take something that's already negative and I can flip that and I can multiply it and I can get that back here. So we can do all of these things. Now notice at this point, the student went through that and they would have gone through that purely visually, but then we can take the students through the same sequence, but now it's symbolic. So now they understand how the symbols are going to attach to the schemas that they're building, the visualizations that they're building. So here, for example, okay, and we can watch this happen. Here's the math that was actually occurring as you're doing this. So now we can see, I understand, whoops, interesting to annotate. I'm not going to do the annotation right now. Nice idea. Actually, maybe we can do that another time. So
Can you pause here for a second, Nigel?
yeah, I can pause. Absolutely.
So,
Brian,
so
yes.
what I think is so cool is, you're taking these ideas, what you just, kind of explained at the beginning of this with integers. And now I really can, we're all kind of getting a concept of these ideas in our head. We're figuring out with these visuals what it looks like. But now you're at the real numbers. You're looking at if you
Uh-huh.
and I've as you've done hundreds of these type of presentations, I've walked in hundreds of classrooms where people have put up basic math problems right at the start without any visuals, and you hardly have any students engaged because they're not able to relate.
Right.
And that's the whole idea. You want kids to relate. And when these visuals, what you got going on at the beginning of this, I can relate to this now. I get it. I'm
Right.
following. I'm tracking with you, and it gives me a good concept of the idea that you're trying to talk about.
Right. So the point is now these numbers now have a context. They have a meaning. They have, for the students, they have an understanding of what this actually means. They're like, oh, three, I get it. I understand how I can combine these things. So you're right. Absolutely. It gives the students that way of thinking about this. And we start with the visual first, because once you can do this visually, attaching the symbols to it on top is pretty easy.
Yeah. Yep.
And as we've seen, when you approach it through the symbols first, you end up in this mess where you've got to try and memorize, like, what is it? Oh, when you're adding or when you're subtracting, you take the absolute value and then you take the sign of the, like, it's like, what on
Yeah.
earth is that supposed to be? You don't need any of those things. If you understand, oh, adding is joining together, and I can do that with positive numbers, negative numbers, I can join it together. Notice everything here centered around the number line. The number line is one of these incredible connectors. It connects across almost all mathematical topics, anything number sense, anything algebraic, it just connects all the way through. And again, it connects from kinder through calculus. It's not something that goes away. Graphing is basically just two number lines, one horizontal, one vertical. And then, of course, 3D graphing is literally just three number lines in each of three dimensions. So these ideas and using these ideas, they connect, they don't go away. Similarly, when you have area models for multiplication, these are things that actually, calculus is literally finding the area under a graph. It's just a sort of more complex way of finding the area of more complex shapes. But so many of these ideas keep connecting and they build over time. So once you understand something like this, it doesn't just apply in this narrow context. It applies to the whole sort of mathematical experience, which is key because that's what we want to build for the students. We want to give them big ideas that actually last, that actually stay with them, that they can use then for a long time, which is kind of
And won't be
honestly one of the
lost.
critical things. That won't be lost, exactly. Because when you understand something like that, you can't lose it. It can't just suddenly go away. You actually have an internalization of that, which is very, very, very different. And one of the things we've seen, I think, Brian, this kind of speaks a lot to what you were talking about here, is we hear from students. We obviously do quite a lot of student surveys, and yeah, they like GG, yada yada. They think it's fun and so forth and so on. That's great. But I think the key piece here is we hear a lot that students actually get that they are learning when they make mistakes. They're learning when things are tricky, and that actually they enjoy it because it's difficult, not because it's easy, which is I don't know if you've got any sort of
Yeah.
anecdotes or things you saw, as a
Well,
principal or as a coach when you sort of
sure.
saw kids using this.
Well, yeah, as a principal mostly, because I'd walk into these classrooms and like I said a second ago, if you had a traditional math problem on the wall, on the board, even a number talk, they may not engage with it so well. But when you put one of our puzzles, a game up there, the hands fly up, and all of a sudden that that puzzle talk becomes invigorating for that kid because there's no fear math there. There's nothing. It's
Right.
visuals. They can just chat about what they're looking at, and that comfortability that we talked about. And I like to say we've talked a lot about in ST Math a lot about productive struggle, the ability to persevere when problem solving. I like to use the word comfortably difficult or comfortably challenging. There's this feeling of this is a bit hard. However, I have
Hmm.
this confidence. I have some comfortable engaging with it, so I want to do it. I want to figure out, and also there's no fear of failure. You just jump in and you play the games, and I saw that, and I
Right.
saw my buildings. This every quote here confirms what I saw. I saw in my buildings where the culture became identified, where students really they not only did they like math, they said I can do math. I like it
Mm.
and I can do it. And that's to me is the math culture that's exceptional. We want to have in our buildings, and especially at the start of next school year. We want to re-engage kids in that relationship to math, that they can do it and they can like it. And I'm all for it.
Absolutely. Cool. And actually, one of the interesting things, we had a fascinating study that was published last year. I actually know Taya Rutherford. She was a researcher at UCI years ago, but now she's at University of Maryland. But she and her team did a really interesting study on the impact of ST Math on students, what we call self-efficacy or self-belief. Basically,
Mhm.
they ended up believing more. I am a math person. They literally changed the way they thought about themselves as math people. So it counteracted that I am not a math person thing. They actually kind of, were like, oh no, I can do math. And I think Brian, you mentioned before about when kids feel that they can do math, that changes their sort of relationship with school even, because like if
Totally.
they're afraid of math, that really is a big like hurdle basically.
Hmm. Well, for
So
sure. And you think about social emotional learning, and that's a
mm,
big one,
mm,
and that's attached to to learning loss conversations. We in social emotional anxiety, learning anxiety, math anxiety, that's all tied into the kind of the softer skills of perseverance, of critical thinking, problem solving. And I think ST Math and how we set the tone and that just environment in the math classroom helps that student have a totally different skill set, so that they can
yeah.
really, and I think it's transferable into other content areas and hopefully their own social emotional identity.
Cool. All right. So we're back where we started from, and I'm not going to have us play this again because I want to now look at something a little interesting. So this is obviously the game that we did in the very beginning, Upright Gigi. And in
Mhm.
fact, here's the one. I'm going to get something wrong very intentionally because I just want to make sure that everyone kind of sees what happens. Because I think, Brian, this speaks a lot. I forget what you said. Comfortable. What was it?
Comfortably
Comfortable.
hard, comfortably challenging,
Comfortably difficult.
comfortably
Right, right,
difficult.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think a large piece of that comes from what happens when you make a mistake. Because I'm going to get something wrong right now. And great question from Sherman. I don't know, Brian, if you just want to reply, because sorry, I got
Sure.
distracted then for a minute, because that's a really, really good question, which we will actually get to later as well. Sorry, I get very excited by the math stuff and tend to go off on long tangents connected to the math. And I'm missing the very practical things that you guys, I'm sure, are all crying out for. So I do apologize for that. But yeah, let's just watch again what happens here. I tried it and it didn't work. And I get to try it again. There was no judgment. It didn't take me to easier questions. It didn't say, no, you don't need to be at this grade level. You need something easier. It basically, I just get to try the puzzle again. Now, if I repeatedly get something wrong and I get stuck somewhere, my teacher will get an alert. So a lot of our professional training comes into then sort of, okay, how can we help teachers facilitate students when they hit a block? But the last thing, if students are struggling somewhere, ST Math is mastery based. So if they've made it to a certain point in the program, that means we're pretty comfortable that they got everything that they've done so far. So if we find a place where they're struggling, the last thing we're going to do is pull them away from that. We've found and identified the very place at which they're having difficulty. So what we want is to specifically then help teachers facilitate, ask questions, good questions of the students, such as, so show me what you tried. What happened when? What do you think would happen if? That type of stuff, those types of questions. And in probably 99 out of 100 cases, and Brian, you can probably verify this, you've been a building principal, you've obviously done trainings with teachers as well. Those types of conversations with kids are enough to get them unstuck. Like in many, many cases, that's enough for them to go, oh, I get it. I see what I was doing. Because
Absolutely. Yeah.
generally, they've built most of that underlying neural network. They've got it, they've built it. They just haven't made the final little connections. And suddenly the right question of like, did you think about this or have you tried this? And suddenly it's like, boom, it connects and away they go. So, all right, so I
Yeah, I
do
think
want to talk. Oh, go on, Brian. Yeah, quickly.
no, I think
Absolutely.
this we undervalue great facilitating questions in education and instructional practice. And a teacher does that so well so often in maybe ELA or science class, inquiry learning. But math, we sometimes we kind of go through that process, that linear, here's how it needs to be done, versus asking a question for that student to kind of discover and figure out that complex problem, so they can have that schema to solve it as it gets higher up. And the teacher becomes literally the intervention tool in that moment too, with that facilitating
Yep,
question.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges, obviously, if you don't have interesting questions around for students to grapple with, you can't really do inquiry-based learning, right? Like, if the only questions you've got are really dull worksheets, there's not a lot going to be happening with inquiry-based learning. So really having these tools is kind of what drives that and makes that kind of interesting. All right, so just a little touch, and for those of you that were here last week, Jim, I know you've seen this before, so I apologize, but just kind of you can listen to it again but it's kind of key because this fundamentally is what's happening inside every single ST Math puzzle. And to get through a grade level, kids will solve over 3,000 puzzles. That's a lot of learning by doing a lot of hands-on learning. And I know, Brian, you put the amount of time per week that's our sort of recommended time. And
Mhm.
what's going on here is something called the perception action cycle. And this is not a mind research thing. This isn't something we invented. This is a well understood piece of neuroscience that every single human being uses on a daily basis. So all of your kids can do this. This is why this is such an equity oriented program, because this is based on something that every single student has. In fact, all mammals actually use the perception action cycle. And I know I've made the joke before that even if we might not always think so, generally all the students in our class actually do fit into that category, although sometimes it might appear a little bit different. But all students can do this. They all have the cognitive machinery to use this perception action cycle as a learning tool. And the way it works in ST Math is a little bit like this. Whenever you're confronted with a problem, in this case, we're trying to figure out how we're going to get GG across the screen, we fire up what we call our existing schema. And in education, we typically call this your prior knowledge, like the stuff that you've got, whatever you've got in your brain. Basically, whatever neural networks you've built, whatever schema are there, they will fire up, and you will use those to try and make a prediction. You'll go, oh, I think this will solve the problem. Then you'll take an action. You'll choose some moves in the game. We actually did 166, which is a fantastically interesting way of solving the problem. Totally fine. You take an action, and there's an outcome. The game just animates out whatever you tell it to do. And this is true of every single ST Math game. It doesn't matter how it works, what it's about. It'll just animate out whatever you got. And then we perceive that. We literally see it. And in the brain, right in the middle, is a little piece called the hippocampus. And in there, the schema that fired up, the prediction that we made is held there. And now here's our perception. So here's what I thought was going to happen. Here's what I see actually happening. And in the hippocampus, those two things are compared. And in this case, they match. So the hippocampus sends out a signal and it reinforces that schema. It literally grows that neural network and makes it bigger. So the next time you see a similar problem, you've actually got more mental machinery available to actually tackle it and get it right and solve that problem. And this is how we actually build maps of the world around us. This is how rats escape from mazes, for example. And we, use this to build all kinds of schemas about everything, but also we can use it to build schemas about math. numeracy, number sense, fraction number sense, proportional reasoning, spatial reasoning. When you guys fired up and solved that problem earlier, you were using your spatial reasoning schema. But of course, we don't just learn when we get things right. So something very fascinating is what happens here when we get something wrong. Let's say a very different schema fired up. We took an action. The game, as you saw, just animates out whatever we do, no judgment. But in this case, Gigi did not get across the screen, and we perceive it, we see it. So here's what I thought was going to happen, held in the hippocampus. Here's what actually happened. They get compared, but in this case, they do not match. So now a very different signal comes from the hippocampus, different chemical, and that schema gets kind of deprioritized. So the next time you see something like this, it's much less likely to fire up. And this is how we address misconceptions. Students often have a lot of them, and this is how we address those by getting these moments where they go, that didn't work. And it actually gradually reduces those misconceptions and helps to put the right ones in place. But something else really important happens when you make a mistake. The hippocampus sends out a second signal, something called theta waves, that basically emanate from the hippocampus and put your brain in kind of like a learning state. It basically says to the brain, you need to learn something new. And we've all had this moment. Anytime you try doing something, didn't work quite the way you thought it was going to, and you get this momentary kind of like, that's weird, this little flash of curiosity. That is theta waves emanating from your hippocampus, basically telling your brain, you need to learn something new. And that impetus then is obviously a critical piece of this. But all of this only happens if students are engaged in this process and actually making predictions, which is one of the reasons why this is a game-based learning system, because by having it as a game-based learning system means we can get students to engage in this process, and they implicitly understand that in every single puzzle, doesn't matter what we throw at them, they're trying to get Gigi across the screen. So there's a lot of advantages to actually having this game-based system as a mechanism for this process. But this is what's happening inside every single puzzle. And one of the big outcomes of this, if you like, is that we are forever in math education. I'm sure this is universally true. It was certainly true in Los Angeles Unified, certainly true in pretty much every district I've visited. We're trying to get kids working up here, and you've probably all seen different versions of this chart. And yes, dopamine release. Yes, indeed. Nice, I like it. Yes, when that moment happens, and boom, and yes, you do absolutely get dopamine release when you solve the problem, which of course is why you can actually get addicted to problem solving in a very real sense, actually, and that you get addicted to that moment of like, yes, it's actually very cool. That's another whole angle on it. So there's all sorts of fascinating things that occur there. So that's an interesting point. But I've seen these charts called rigor relevance charts or quadrant D charts, different things in different parts of the country. But the basic gist is here. We can look at the types of activities that kids are doing in math class through a couple of lenses. One is, what type of thinking are the kids being asked to do? Are they basically being asked to sort of regurgitate knowledge, or are they being asked to do high-level creative thinking? Similarly, we can ask, what type of questions are they being asked? Is it just a bunch of routine questions over and over again? Or are they being asked non-routine questions, as in questions they may have not seen before? I know it used to freak out my high school students when I used to put questions like this on an assessment, because to them that felt unfair. To me, it didn't at all, because I was trying to see how can they apply their knowledge to solve something new. That seems like a totally fair thing, but a lot of our education system here is based upon a very different theory of action, which is why sometimes we teach very differently. And the implication here is we want students working a lot in this space. We want them using creative thinking to solve challenging problems. We want them to be solving non-routine problems, things that they haven't seen before. If all they're able to do is solve a bunch of stuff they've seen before, it's actually not very useful, because we can program computers to do that. Nobody actually needs to do that anymore. So we need students in this space. The problem is, as we've spoken about, vast majority of curricular materials, whether they're online or whether they're printed, there's no magic about stuff being online. They fall very firmly in this bucket. It's basically we're going to teach you how to do something, and now here's 30 questions exactly the same that basically ask you to do it over and over again. My son literally had 3 worksheets of this to do yesterday before going back to school, which were basically on adding and subtracting integers, positive and negative integers, funnily enough. And that is a coincidence because I was already looking at that last week. But and that, there is a role for practice. Practice is something that's definitely useful. You need to be able to be good, sort of fluent at doing things in math. Certainly, it's a struggle if you're not. But the problem comes when your only experience of math is that it's this. And that is very, very problematic. That's where the math anxiety comes from. There's this huge question of why am I doing any of this? And obviously, it's something we hear a lot from kids. Why math? Why are we doing it? What's the point of doing all this stuff? Why am I learning the quadratic function? Because if you've never, ever had the chance to actually use the math that you've got in your brain to be creative with it and solve non-routine problems, you don't get a whole lot of dopamine firing up from completing a worksheet, right? It really doesn't happen. That's not a thing that occurs. But when you think creatively, synthesize ideas, and solve non-routine problems, you do get a lot of dopamine firing up. And suddenly this question of why am I doing this just goes away. I'm doing it because this is awesome and it's really cool to figure out stuff. And obviously when students move into all kinds of careers, this type of problem solving is valuable everywhere. It's not just a STEM thing. High school principals need to do a heck of a lot of rigorous problem solving. All of us, to get through this last year, had to do an awful lot of this. So this is the space we want kids working in. And obviously, one of the things we're able to do very effectively with ST Math is we are able to give all students time in this space with no language barrier, which is obviously a big piece here, because oftentimes the only way we have of asking questions here is very much through word problems. But we're able to give kids that experience with no language barrier from pre-K all the way through 8th grade. So that's kind of one of the, I guess, the sort of critical pieces, the things that we're able to do. And so one thing that we've seen that I think really speaks to why this can be such an effective tool right at this moment, and Brian, I'll let you talk a little bit about sort of the math culture that you've seen grow around this type of thing when it's sort of implemented, is we actually looked at students and how they made progress through ST Math. So obviously some objectives in ST Math are easier than others, right? The math is difficult, the puzzles are different. And so we looked at a bunch of students who on another program's assessment were assessed at being on grade level. So they were in 4th grade and they were all assessed at being on grade level. And this was the average number of attempts that they took to get through certain ST Math objectives. So it's like, okay, that's interesting. But what's really fascinating then is when we looked at the students who were assessed at being 1 grade level behind by this other program's assessment. And they also were able to make it through the ST Math on grade level objectives. They weren't, in ST Math, we didn't put them a grade level behind. In ST Math, we kept them on grade level. Even though they were tested at being a grade level behind, we kept them on grade level and they were able to make it through. They just needed more time. And what's interesting is even kids who were 2 grade levels behind were able to make it through. They needed more time. And believe it or not, even kids who were 3 grade levels behind were able to make it through. They just needed a lot more time. So actually, I know we had a question earlier about how much time should kids get. Those are recommended times. And if, for example, you were using ST Math in a situation where you knew some students, were significantly behind, those numbers might need to be revised significantly in terms of how much time they might need, because you can see here kids who were sort of, significantly behind, as this assessment showed here, needed a lot more time. But the key idea here is they were all able to get through the ST Math objectives. And that, again, I think speaks to this idea that we strip away the language to start with and the symbols. Now we bring those back in later, but we start purely visual, attacking the big ideas. Are all these students, even if they're behind grade level, able to problem solve once they can do it from that big ideas up? And the answer is yes, they can. So this is kind of a really interesting piece here, and definitely I think it's got a lot of a lot of, you know, sort of power in this moment. The fact that obviously we are, dealing with kids that might have some significant gaps. All right, Brian, I know you created this slide actually to look at different ways that SD math can be
Mhm.
used. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that culture that you've seen, once you get kind of kids rolling on this, once they start going, oh yeah, I'm a math person. If you want to talk a little bit about the
Yeah.
culture that you can see emerging at schools.
Just a couple of things on that last slide first. The opportunity for all kids to be um, mastery based on grade level is such a huge point
Mm,
about ST math, because we know disproportionately so many of the students who are grade level behinds
right.
are students of color or identified economically disadvantaged, and they are never given an opportunity to catch back up. I mean, truly,
Yep. Yep.
it's hypocritical to think
I
if you
saw
put
it
a
in LA at
yeah, yeah,
fast scale. Yep, absolutely.
if you think you move them off grade level in first grade, that day they'll magically get these fourth grade algebraic thinking concepts down by the end of the year for their state assessment. It's you're
Yeah.
kidding yourself and you're not being honest. So I just love the fact that we're giving students of every stripe an opportunity to be successful on
Yep.
grade level, and you see it. And this is just like, again, back to that point about relevancy and relating. This kids are playing games, they're leveling up, they're getting tries just like they would in other game like scenarios.
Mm,
If they play a game out in the in Minecraft land or Halo or whatever it might be, whatever the game is, they're playing the thing in front of them that's challenging but doable, and they're trying to figure it out, and they may need several tries, but they got to figure it out. They don't just go off that game console to another years made prior. It's that current one
no.
that's relevant to them. So I just wanted to button that up there.
Yeah.
But here's here's the culture that ST Math really builds fundamentally in a school. And most of the students who engage with ST Math in a building are going to be on their grade level, what we call journey. And so the students are going to play their personalized pathway that's differentiated for them. It's one-to-one on their device. That student's there. The teacher can be pretty much, away from that student's engagement with the personal pathway. They can be as involved or as little involved as the teacher is available in that classroom setting. But also another space is assignments, and especially for this coming year in COVID,
Mm,
coming out of COVID, I think this is really huge. A teacher can assign specific learning objectives that target the instruction that they think is most critical for that student learner, and it could be assigned by groups of students or a whole class or individual. And again, that's on a key learning objective, on a standard, on a topic that you would want to go along. I like it too because I think it can go parallel to that teacher's pacing guide or curriculum they've got going in the
right. Right.
classroom, so
Right.
they
Right.
can
Yeah.
match it
Yeah.
up to whatever they're learning in their core class. And then this last category, academic discourse. This is basically the idea is that the teacher's autonomy can pull out lessons, puzzle talks that they can use to directly instruct students on some lessons that they want to blow up a little bit of the traditional path that a kid's learning from. They want to use the games from ST Math to really build out that visual model so they can have that conceptual understanding in a lesson format. Again, that's completely autonomous to the teachers, where they want to match it up in their pace and sequencing of their lessons. So yeah, these are the fun categories that I saw in my buildings, a lot of teachers using, and they're all unique and pretty much at the discretion of the teacher.
One of the things that I found fascinating, I know we've only got a few minutes left. See, I can ramble really well here, but we'll just well, um, is I've actually done presentations where I've asked large numbers of people, what is the purpose of academic discourse? And I don't know, Brian, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, I'm not going to dive into this with everybody here. But Brian, I don't know if you could take a wild guess. If I was to ask, say, a bunch of teachers in buildings you've been in, what was the purpose of academic discourse? What do you think the most popular answer would be?
The stereotypical answer would probably
Yes, the
be
stereotypical answer.
for teachers to push in the academic vocab that kids need to learn.
Academic vocabulary, absolutely. Yes, that is number one answer. What's the point of academic discourse? To teach academic vocabulary. And what's fascinating here, when we're talking about academic discourse, yeah, sure, the academic vocabulary will emerge during it, but that is not the point of it. The point is to give kids, like if they're basically the point is these three things go together, right? Students in the
Mhm.
journey are building schema, they're building the ideas, that perception action cycle's kicking in, and they're building these ideas. Academic discourse then is the key thing. It's a sense making tool. It's that opportunity for students to take the ideas that they've kind of half got and they've got them, they sort of get them, but then by talking about them and having to explain, oh, I did it this way, and then hearing somebody else do it a different way, that is what helps the students make sense of those ideas. And I know we haven't had a chance to really look at a great deal of stuff, but we do have lesson pieces and tools to drive this that are based around games, based around specific puzzles that are really good that we know drive that kind of discussion. And so anyway, all right, I don't want to get too sidetracked there. All right, Brian, this is a good one. Just last couple of minutes. What's wrong with this picture? This is a treadmill. This is not actually the one in my garage, but the one in my garage actually looks worse than this. What's wrong with this picture? What is wrong with it?
It's
There's a lot
cluttered and
wrong right here.
it's cluttered and it's not being utilized for its purpose.
It's not being utilized for its purpose, and I think yeah, this is a key thing, and this is a slightly different discussion. But just buying a program does not. It's all about. I know we had this discussion earlier about the minutes, but it
Mhm.
is so important. Kids need time, and sadly, we see too many cases where people think, oh, well, they could use a bit of this or they could use a bit of that, and it's just STMath becomes one of these so many things that teachers might use a bit of, but when it's not done with intent, you don't really get results. And it's a bit like, yeah, you can buy a treadmill and you can have it there, but if you're not using it with intent, you don't really drive that. I know I meant to get to this a lot earlier, Brian, so you could talk a lot more about implementation, but I think it gets the idea across, and I think
Yep.
the implementation is key. Then the point is that and certainly from a principal perspective or a coach, someone who's helping to drive that implementation, it's a critical role because this is
And
something that
I the only
needs that
thing I would add to that
intentionality.
is the screen time that so much of our educators are worried about, and parents really too. When you're on STMath, every minute you're on it, it's a minute learning. The impact is happening,
Yeah,
and that's the whole idea there. It's a purposeful screen time. It's not
right.
just this randomized time, whatever. There's a lot of good research behind it. Go ahead.
Cool. All right, so I guess we're going to wrap. I want to say thank you very much to everybody. So, look, our final point is basically, look, if this was the old way of teaching math, making you do it like a machine, the whole point now is we want students to understand it because they're going to be the ones who have to build the machine. So, I want to say thank you very, very much to everybody who was with us today. Jim, total pleasure to see you again. You, sir, are a glutton for it. So awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you all very, very much. And please, if you have questions and so forth and so on, I think there's a survey thing and stuff you can reach out as well afterwards. So please feel free absolutely to do so. And really enjoyed everybody being here. So thank you all very, very much. And
Thanks,
thank you, Brian.
Nigel. That was fun.
All right. All right. Good stuff. Thanks, everybody.